you are, we are recording this, so if there are any colleagues who are not in attendance, you are able to direct them back to this webinar. We will be giving you a lot of information, and there may be some things that you want to review at a later time. So good afternoon. I was so good up until good afternoon. This is the Equity Workforce Training Equipment and Infrastructure Grants RFP meeting. I'm going to briefly do some quick introductions of the team for the voices you will be hearing during this meeting, and then we will move on into the agenda and into the bulk of our work. So my name is Janelle Granum. I am the Program Director for Youth and Young Adult Programs here at Mass EC, and I will pass it over to Edward.
Hi, I'm Edward Shea. I'm the Program Director for Adult Training and MWBE Support. I will pass it over to Anitra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anitra Ford, and I'm a Program Manager with the Workforce and Equity team. Ben?
Thanks, Anitra. Ben Christensen, Program Manager, Workforce Equity team. I'll pass it to Camilla.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camilla Bacol, and I'm the Program Coordinator for the Workforce Equity team. Lauren?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren. I'm the fellow on the Workforce Equity team.
Jennifer's on as well, I think.
Hi, everyone. Jennifer Applebaum, Managing Director of Workforce Development. Thank you for joining us today.
So I'll briefly go over the agenda for today. So we are going to look at some of our top target occupation and populations. We'll review some of the eligibility, some of the funding sources. We'll do a quick Q&A. What I will say is we will ask that questions be put in the chat, and you may ask questions in the chat throughout the programming, and we will get to them. During our Q&A breaks, we will probably address those questions that could not be answered in the chat. We will look at some of the strand overviews and some of the selection criteria. We will look at a program example. We will look again at the process and timeline, talk about some office hours and networking, and then we will have a second Q&A for any questions we did not get in the first Q&A. That being done, I'll move on. So Mass CEC has certain targeted climate critical sectors. For us, it is net zero grid, high performance building, offshore wind, and clean transportation. In these sectors, we look at certain kind of jobs that we think are going to be in high demand, and we are focused on certain populations. So one of the things we will talk about are the environmental justice populations. This is by the 2020 census. These are certain neighborhoods that have traditionally not benefited for some of the energy projects that have happened in the state. If you are interested in finding out what those are, we have a QR code for you to access those if you want to look into what those are a little more. We also at Mass CEC have certain climate critical occupations that we look at. And these are examples of some of the occupations we would be looking at as people apply for training. One of the things that is important to note in Massachusetts we'll talk about electricians and solar installers, and in the state of Massachusetts, those are the same. And so we just want to make sure that as people are looking at their programming, if you are thinking of solar installation because it is a high priority occupation, you are also very much aware that will probably mean you will have an electrical program as well. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Edward.
Thanks, Janelle. So the big thing to take away today is how to apply to this RFP, but we have several other RFPs that are open. As Janelle mentioned, we have a focus on priority populations, which is represented on the two right columns in blue. We will be announcing new MWB grants in the new fiscal year, in calendar year, 2024. We do still have open rolling planning and capacity grants if you are not quite ready to implement. And then on the left is another big thing. A very similar grant to the one we'll be talking about today is the Climate Critical Workforce Training Equipment and Infrastructure RFP, which is focused on individual training for any Mass resident. But we do encourage that you consider the priority populations when you do apply for that. In addition, that makes space for incumbent worker training. And like the grant that we'll be talking about today, there are funds set aside from the ARPA funding to do equipment and infrastructure building. The difference between that and the current RFP that we'll talk about today is that the climate critical grant requires a match, whereas the grant today recommends a match but does not require it. And in addition to that, the grant we'll be talking about today has a strand on career exploration, which we'll get into later. Please use the QR codes that you see throughout the slide to access each RFP, and you can see the deadlines throughout. Janelle mentioned the priority populations. I won't rehash that entirely, but due to legislative funding in 2021, we are enabled to offer these funding opportunities to support those priority populations. That's 12 million annually, and that is why this particular grant requires you to focus on those populations. In addition to that fund, this fund is also this RFP is also supported by the ARPA fund, which is in response from the federal level to the COVID pandemic. So in particular, what you should take away from this is that because it is federal money, you will have higher reporting requirements, which we'll talk about later. In addition, we do anticipate that we will ask you to complete all work by December 31st, 2025, since we do have to report expenditure of the funds to the federal government by the end of the 2026 calendar year. So moving on. Who's eligible to apply? If you look at page 8, we have a big rundown of this. We do encourage partnerships because we recognize that training of individuals is not a simple thing, and it takes a comprehensive partnership to offer all the wraparound support services potentially necessary to overcome obstacles faced by these priority populations. You can see on the right some of the type of entities that we recognize as potentially good lead organizations. In addition to being based in Massachusetts, you must, as a lead applicant, be able to produce a certificate of good standing. The project must not be a project already being funded by Mass DEC funds, so it must be separate and distinct. Plus, we'll be asking you to certify that there are no conflicts of interest based on the partnerships you bring in. And this is just a quick example. We're agnostic to which type of organization is the best lead applicant, which is why we have them arrayed in the circle. But we do advise you to consider which of the partners is most capable of dealing with the administrative burden of a lead applicant. So the lead applicant will be doing the invoicing, will be dealing with reporting, and so on and so forth. And with that, we'll open it up to Q&A. If you haven't put anything into the chat box, we welcome you to do so now. So I see a question in there right now. The question is whether the pots for January and May deadlines are equal. The answer to that is not that they're parsed by the deadline. It's basically until funding is expended. So this is a competitive grant. If we get a lot of very strong applications in January, it's potential that the funds could be expended, but we will, analyze as things go. If there are any other questions, please put them in the chat box, and either I or one of my associates will read it out. We'll give it another. I see there. Okay, so I see someone asking about whether applicants are eligible for multiple strands. That will be answered in the latter half, so I will leave that for the latter half of the presentation. So there was an ask about additional training cycles. So this separate and distinct angle of it will kind of depend on how that impact will look based on the application. So if that would result in a strong impact and our scores view that as an increase in impact, we may view that as competitive, but generally speaking, we are looking for, separate and distinct projects to expand the capabilities of the system. And I don't know if Jennifer wants to add to that.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, the most important thing is that we are not being asked to fund something that has already been funded, right? So it needs to be distinct from the set of participants that has already been funded. It can be a continue on additional funding for new participants within a previously funded program. To Edward's point, we are thoughtful about how these resources get spread across the ecosystem. So being able to articulate the importance of continuation and also how you might be looking at additional braided funding for sustainability in the long term would be important in the cases of an application like that.
So I think we have space for one more question, then we need to move on, but we will take your questions and answer them on the Q&A that will be posted to the actual RFP website. So if your question doesn't get answered today, check there, and or we highly advise you come to open office hours. I see that there's a question about collaborating with companies external to Massachusetts, and the response would be generally yes, if those companies are offering placement within Massachusetts, as the intent of the funding is to promote jobs within Massachusetts, within the Commonwealth, to reach the climate critical goals of the Commonwealth. So it really kind of depends on how those companies are operating. They don't have to be headquartered in Massachusetts, but we will analyze whether those companies are operating in Mass and resulting in an impact in the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Janelle to carry on. We see there's a lot of good questions, but some of those should be answered in the next section.
So I'm going to go over some of the general application process, some of the things that are the same between our three strands. So first part of this is to make sure you review the RFP and all the attachments, just to make sure you are eligible to apply for this grant. Then to attend this webinar, which is where you are now, so you can, if there are any questions that you may have about your own eligibility or about some of the projects we are sponsoring, or general questions about this RFP, those questions can be answered. Then if there are additional questions, you can either write us after this, or you can attend some of our open office hours. And we are also maintaining a frequently asked questions page so that those questions that do come up are answered and people have a reference for those. And the last part of this process is just to make sure that your application is put in completely by either our January 9th, by 11:59 on January 19th, or if you wish to have the later date, the May 1st deadline. We will accept applications between January and May. However, anything that is submitted, let's say on January 21st, will be considered in our May 1st deadline, which I think is important to note. For our attachments for these, most of these will have 4 attachments for review. Attachment 1 is just your general, we are the organization, we are applying. Number 2, attachment 2 is the actual application. Attachment 3 is the budget. And then depending on which strands, you're either going to look at our grant agreement for strand A and B, or you're going to look at our ARPA grant agreement. Again, the one for that is attachment 5 has additional documents due to the federal reporting requirement. One of the things that we do say to people is our grant agreements have a lot of our boilerplate language, and we ask that people review that, as that is the stuff that is a little harder to change if we do go through the contracting process, because we do ask that you sign off or whether or not this language is agreeable to you. I would say that the next thing to go over is our timeline for this. And I will go over it not in probably as much detail, but I will go over some details. The RFP is out, right? We will be taking questions until April 5th by email, or those that are submitted to us in open office hours, and those that are submitted to us at this time. Those frequently asked questions are updated every month on the second Tuesday. We are having this webinar. We will have another one on March 12th. If you feel that this is not the time and you have additional colleagues that you would like to attend that webinar as well. Right now, office hours are running. We have until January. We will have additional office hours added after January, but these are the ones we're running to make sure that people who need to be seen by January 19th has an opportunity to talk to us. Again, January 19th at 11:59 is when the first priority deadline is in. And then after that, it'll be May 1st. We will choose who to interview based on those applications, and then notification of awards will hopefully be in March if you're a January applicant, and then by June if you are a May applicant. We ask if there are diversity of approaches. We do know that some of these are innovative. You've never seen it before. You're curious if it's going to come. These are the things we're looking for. We're trying to get a diverse pipeline, which means we need a diversity of approaches, and we need those approaches to also be in a diversity of places. So you may be supporting things that are not necessarily 100%. Like, I'm not it's not electricians, but I'm doing something that is adjacent to it, and that is going to be very important to support the work. Even though it wasn't listed as one of your 20, I think it's like number 21, and you could make a compelling case using some of your references to why that particular training program or career awareness strand is important. So we do appreciate more approaches to getting this pipeline built. Next slide, sorry. Selection criteria for these. These are the selection criteria that are for all 3 strands. We will, as my colleagues talk about strands A, B, and C, they will also discuss some of the strand specific criteria, but we are looking for, of course, experience. We're looking that you have target occupations and populations. We are looking for the level of engagement you have with employers. We are looking at your outcomes, your budgets, your sustainability, and we're looking at that diversity of approaches. We are looking to see, is it innovative? Is it different? Is it distinct to things we've seen before? And that can also be in terms of geography or in terms of what you are proposing. Next slide. In terms of timeline, this is just to help people understand how far out these grants can go. So for example, strands A and B are up to 3 years. Strand C, because it is, again, the limited funding, and we hope to have this all the projects done by 2025, they are only at most 18 months out. But, you know, it's important that all program participants are very aware of what they can do and what their own timeline looks like as they apply for ours. And now, I believe I turn this over to Anitra.
Thanks, Janelle. So for today, I'm going to be talking about Strand A. So as it stands, Strand A, which is called the Career Pathway Training Leading to Employment and Climate Critical Priorities, this award range goes from $200,000 to $1.2 million, and the duration of the award will be from anywhere from 1 to 3 years. There is a caveat on that 1 to 3 years in which you should be mindful of. An additional year of post-program monitoring and metric tracking is required. So you want to make sure that your proposed budget aligns with this ask. A match, of course, is recommended, but not required. And that we're hoping to see a comprehensive training plan that includes wraparound support services and case management, as well as placement support into clean energy jobs that result from the trainings. Next slide. So as we speak about program design, this is just kind of a snapshot of what you will find on page 15 of the RFP. So we are looking, like I said, for comprehensive training plans with strong vocational and work readiness curricula that meets the needs of employers. Your training delivery models embrace innovative and proven strategies for success. The program design includes case management and support services tailored to meet your participant needs. And that includes program completion, retention, and advancement. It also leverages partnerships and resources and demonstrates commitment to increase access to EJ and disadvantaged communities. And finally, demonstrates capacity to manage fiscal and administrative obligations. So the outcomes that we are looking for is that we will see attainment of industry recognized credentials, case management that successfully removes barriers, placement into clean energy occupations, job retention, and increased wages. And we're also looking for employer partners with comprehensive placement strategies that include job development, staff, and or employer partners with provided letters of support or MOUs. So here is an example of the traditional pipeline, is that you would conduct employer engagement parallel to your outreach, recruitment, intake assessment, your training, your placement and retention, and then at the same time, providing wraparound support services to those participants. And now we're on to Strand B. Ben?
Thank you, Nitra. So I'll be talking about Strand B. So next slide, please. So Strand B is the Clean Energy Career Awareness, Exploration, Navigation, Preparedness strand. It's the first time it's been its standalone strand in an implementation round of funding. So these award ranges from 50,000 to 600,000. Again, these are 1 to 3 year awards. The match is not required. We're looking for a clear and thoughtful range of exposures and career pathway options. The importance of the access to next steps, so leading to off-ramps into training, employment in clean energy, jobs, internships, or post-secondary education. And similar to Strand A, with emphasis on wraparound support services and case management for the populations that you're serving. Next slide, please. So the unique callouts for this strand, so the additional selection criteria include that your application will present a comprehensive program design that incorporates relevant best practices for the targeted population you're looking to serve, and that importantly features a clear and thoughtful range of exposures to career pathway options, including clear access to next steps, off-ramps, which we'll be talking about in a moment, delivery models, embrace innovative and proven strategies to increase success, and that, again, that design includes case management and support services. So some of the outcomes that we'd be looking for, so select successful applications will include clearly defined milestones that indicate a successful completion for the individual participants. So once they're finished with your career exploration, where are they going to next? Is it going to be a submission of a final exploration project, attainment of an internship opportunity, enrollment in a training program, similar to what is being offered through Strand A, enrollment and matriculation in a post-secondary institution, or placement into a clean energy occupation. We'd be looking for a description of plans to engage the partners who will be providing some of these off-ramps, whether it be training providers, employers, educational institutions. And then we would want to see letters of support or MOUs from at least 2 of those partners that are offering these off-ramps. And I'll be turning it over to Camilla to talk about Strand C.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. So now we will be talking about Strand C, which is equipment and infrastructure to support climate critical training. So Strand C provides funding for equipment used by the training participants and or infrastructure that needs to be built to host a training program. And the award range for this strand is $50,000 up to $750,000 with a duration of 1 year to 18-month award, with a stipulation that if awarded, the contracts will largely end by December 31, 2025, since MAS-CEC is required to expend all of the funds from ARPA prior to December 31, 2026. So we recommend that all invoices must be submitted the year prior. So in order to be eligible for Strand C, you must submit a Strand A proposal, which is the career pathway training strand, or you must be a current workforce equity awardee. So for Strand C, match is not required, but we do recommend matching to leverage resources if possible, but it's not required for this solicitation. And the next slide, we will be talking about the additional selection criteria. So we will review Strand C according to the selection criteria, which you can find on page 16 of the RFP. And it will be reviewed based on the impact that the added equipment and infrastructure will have on your training program. And this includes the outcomes of expanding training offerings that allows more students to enroll or participate in your program, and that it will lead to the addition or improvement of in-demand climate critical skills. So you can find the full list of the additional selection criteria, again, on page 16 of the solicitation. And next slide, please. In the applications, reviewers will also look for, a detailed description of how the equipment and infrastructure funding will build capacity for your program and the specific steps to select, procure, and integrate that added capacity into your training program. And in addition to the impact of that equipment and infrastructure, reviewers will also assess, your application based on the gaps and the needs that will be addressed as a result of this funding, and how it will result in the improvement of your existing training, or development of new curriculum, or added training opportunities because of this added capacity resulting from this funding source. So before we go into the final Q&A portion of this presentation, we want to emphasize that office hours are available for potential applicants. It's a way for you to ask questions or discuss ideas about your specific proposal, and it's also a way for you to meet other potential applicants in order to form those partnerships. We really emphasize partnerships because we know that these training programs are very comprehensive and one organization can't do it alone. So we encourage you to attend those office hours to meet other people in the ecosystem. So we will host those office hours every week up until that January deadline. We will host more office hours up until the May final deadline, and that will be posted on our website. Okay, yeah, thank you for listening into this meeting and listening to the overview of all the different strands. So we will now answer more questions you have in the chat, and if you have any additional questions, please also put that in the chat.
So for context, I would advise, if you have specific questions for your particular application and concept, to opt to bring those to an office hours, because that is a non-recorded meeting where we have more space to discuss with you the elements of your potential proposal. So questions asked here, we advise you to ask more logistical and application type questions. I do see one question posted by two people. Essentially, what constitutes equipment and infrastructure? And that's a pretty big question, but basically we're looking for equipment infrastructure that is needed and specialized for the training that you're proposing to do. So there obviously might be some little bit of a bleed there. For example, like PPE is something that's necessary for training, and we might consider depending on the context of it, but we really are looking for impact. So something that increases your long-term capacity for training. So for example, like a mock attic setup where you can practice weatherization with your trainees, that sort of thing, where it's an actual installation that will have long running impact on your training program, as opposed to one-off supplies, although those could be considered under the application as part of the overall application. We're not looking to fund, general office supplies or anything like that.
Yeah, and I would just clarify, so Edward's example around like PPE, anything that is generally a consumable is better off in a supply line than in an equipment line. That said, if the consumable is directly related to the equipment, that may be tenable for the most part. I think that impact metric in terms of being able to expand availability or quality of training is the part that we're most considering. The presentation will be recorded and you will have access to it from our website.
So yes,
we have
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just add, you missed the question. Are you looking to divide the 50 to 600K by multiple suppliers? Or are you open to a single supplier with supporting partners being awarded the majority of these funds should they meet the requirements at scale.
So that range is the range that we would consider for individual awards, 50 to 600,000. It is not an indicator of the amount of the total that is available for that strand. And so it really depends on if an individual proposal can justify 600,000 in terms of impact. And usually that would require a strong set of partners to achieve it, but that is not an indication of the total budget for Strand B.
Can you fund internet access as part of a proposal for computers for participants?
I'll take that one. So I think that this gets into the question of whether or not something can be endured and sustained. So it would say generally internet access is one of those things that's better alongside of a training proposal tied to the cohort of participants that would need said internet access, as opposed to say perhaps alongside a training or infrastructure. So if it's a support service that's being provided either as part of training or career pathway, that would be a place where we would consider that cost.
Okay. I do not see any. I don't know if there are any additional. Oh, if you have had a planning, if you've had a planning and now are in a capacity building grant, is this the correct vehicle to go next?
I would say it's a case-by-case basis. Theoretically, if your capacity building has put you in a place where you're ready to do a full-scale implementation on a broader scale, then yes, this would be the correct next step. I think a lot of that has to be based on the results of the capacity building, and obviously being within the equity funding pool, you have access to the advice of your TA to help you figure out what the next best step would be.
A question I was asked earlier is if microgrid projects are valid to apply.
So I would bring that to office hours, and it really depends on whether there's a job training element to the project.
I was going to say, I believe I put that response in the chat. So definitely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. In terms of, and gave it the same focus as Edward, that we really are looking for the workforce development training component to it. So we would have to hear more to understand.
Yeah, I see the question about the different strand proposals, and I think that's important to surface. So we do allow for applicants to apply to multiple strands. In fact, if you're not a pre-existing equity workforce awardee and you plan on applying to Strand C, you will be required to apply to both Strand C and Strand A. And that would actually be two separate application packets. So if you are looking to come in for the ARPA funding and have not received equity workforce funding, you will have to submit two applications at the same time.
At this time, as other questions gather, maybe it's worth looking at some of the additional funding opportunities we have here at Mass CEC. If you have decided that this is not for you, but you are looking for ways to fund some of your programming, one of the things that we have open right now is our professional services and program support for the Clean Energy Internship Program. I would say to be aware that this is 7 strands. Strands 1 through 5 support the internship program in terms of employer engagement, convening event for internships, and also just diversifying the pipeline of interns and employers geographically as well, and community college participants. Strands 6 and 7 are around the Climate Corps proposal that came out of the Climate Chief's Office report. But also although this has a March 1st application deadline, this does have a December 20th priority deadline for certain strands. Other additional fundings include, and there are office hours for that. The Clean Energy Internship Program is open right now. So if you are looking for an intern that will start in January, this is a great opportunity. We have spots available and the internship is available. You just have to go into the portal and register as a clean energy company or have a job that is clean energy focused, including if you are already a grantee for some of your own work. If that was not part of your original budget, you realize you need an intern, that people have done that. We also have a technical trades and learning program if you are interested in helping high school students access some of these funds, access some of these careers as well. Oh, there's one more. And I will turn that one over to Edward or Jennifer.
Yep. So as mentioned at the top of the call, if you are looking to train beyond the priority populations, you could consider this other grant, the Climate Critical Workforce Training Equipment and Infrastructure Grant, which is also live currently. We do encourage you to still consider equity and priority populations though in your proposal, because that is part of Mass CEC's mandate overall. In addition, the second strand, instead of career exploration, we've replaced it with incumbent worker and upskilling training. So if you are working to help those already in, a particular trade, or for example, to pivot in clean energy and they just need some additional skills, that's a great way to build a training program out for that. And again, it does have an ARPA strand. And this strand C, though, does require a match 1-for-1 for private entities and 25% match for public entities. The deadlines are similar. You have an extra week for the January deadline on this one, but it also falls on the May 1st deadline. So please take a look at that. If you have any lingering questions that weren't answered today and you don't see them answered on the Q&A of the website, or you don't have time to jump in the office hours, although that's highly encouraged to jump in, please write the RFP workforce@masscec.com email address, and we will post them on the Q&A section of the website. Thank you.